elements, right? These are the tragic elements that I want to use in my analysis. I want to look at how what we're really talking about are good and great people. We're not talking about bad people making evil decisions. It's not that kind of story, right? It's a story about essentially good people wanting to do their best and to lead a heroic effort for a nation to survive and prosper. Secondly, this success is achieved, is acknowledged, is rewarded. Thirdly, buoyed by this immense confidence and motivation, the heroes of the story subsequently push in extreme directions, well beyond human limits. And in that, the intoxication of that moment, right, flaws that are embedded in all of us by virtue of being human, and the system, flaws that are embedded in the system that we have built, they get unleashed and are magnified, and they come back to us as a kind of destructive or self-destructive force. In the process, mistakes are made, and because of a lack of self-knowledge or a lack of willingness to acknowledge our weaknesses, these mistakes are denied, and we descend into catastrophe. And now self-knowledge comes, self-consciousness comes, but it comes much too late in the story. And then as we observe this playing out of the broad historical arc of tragedy, we learn something, right? We feel something. And maybe the last point is really where the real tragedy is, right? In that we knew all of this. And we talked about Venice, we talked about Lanfang, we talked about Denmark. And perhaps future people will look back and think about Singapore too, and how we kind of rose and fell tragically. So now, let us look at the Singapore story and see what a tragic reading might do to it. So this is all very familiar, right? We begin as a small, young, vulnerable nation state with limited resources. And we manage to not only survive, but to even succeed magnificently against the odds. But this success is fragile, and it takes a heroic effort by good and great leaders to develop Singapore and establish strong foundations for continued success. Now, this success is not only maintained, according to the story, but increased as leaders align themselves wholeheartedly with market principles. But the epic human endeavor that makes us more, or that rather moves us from a developmental heroism to neoliberal good governance and its amplification, easily turns into hubris and narcissism. We become self-absorbed extremists, and in that moment unleash self-destructive forces that bring unintended consequences, potentially reversing our fortune. Now, I'll come back to what these unintended consequences are. But first, I want to illustrate this idea of tragedy a bit more vividly by juxtaposing the Singapore story with other timeless stories containing some strong tragic elements. First is the Greek myth of Icarus and his father Daedalus. Now, both of them, they're filled with ingenuity, right? So both of them construct wings out of feathers and wax. And this enables them to fly. Now, the wise father tells Icarus to be careful and not to fly too high. But of course, in the sheer exhilaration of flight, Icarus disregards this advice, and he flies so high that he approaches the sun. And here in this painting, the sun is represented by Apollo riding a chariot. Apollo, of course, is the god of the sun, but he is also god of reason, rationality, and order. So in a sense, Icarus is not only exceeding human limitations, but he is defying the gods, and he's defying the proper order of things. And as a result, the rays of the sun melt the wax, and Icarus falls to his death. As we commonly say, pride leads to a fall, and the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Now, here's a second story, the Tower of Babel, which, of course, is from Christian scripture. This is a story about united and ambitious people who decide to build a tower so tall that it would reach the heavens. God disapproves of this hubris and curses the project to failure, simply by making them all speak different languages in order to divide them. So he sort of separated them through diversity. And here's the third story. Again, the myth of Narcissus and Echo, which I already described earlier, but just to remind you, Narcissus is so in love with himself that he drowns in self-absorption. Echo craves his attention, but she is cursed never to have her own voice. And so she is reduced merely to a haunting